I think some more may join us throughout the first few minutes, but I think we can get started.
Great. So I'll kick us off. So thanks everyone for joining this presentation on the ROC, standing for Robotic Operations Center. So really the run, the production support, and really iteration entity of an automation program. This is Marshall Sied speaking. I'm a co-founder and principal at Ashling Partners. We've got on the phone Zach Coles, and I'll allow him to give his own introduction when he starts with some of his content. I really am the moderator today, just to keep a couple of administrative items. If you have questions throughout, feel free to use the Q&A function. We will be tracking that, and we'll be dedicating some time towards the end of the conversation and the presentation to Q&A to cycle through those questions. If we can't get to all those questions, we will be sure to follow up post-call, depending on timing. Chat and microphones are disabled at this point to ensure that we can get through the presentation and the natural flow of it. And outside of that, hopefully this is very informative and educational by design. So from an agenda perspective, we're going to do a quick kind of overview, more so from a context perspective, on how Ashling approaches intelligent automation and RPA programs. And then we're really going to get into the crux of the conversation today around how production support is an integral part of an intelligent automation flywheel. Zach's really going to take us through the definition of what a ROC is, and probably most importantly, why support and maintenance and monitoring for an RPA program is unique to traditional production support models. We're also going to speak about common challenges in the support structure that we have seen through experience and we think we'll continue to see as these programs evolve. Zach's going to take us through some dashboard examples, both from an operational and a business value perspective. And then the overall value of the ROC is really where we're going to conclude the conversation, because we do feel that this is something bigger than traditional production support. And we'll conclude with Q&A. So from an Ashling perspective, really what Ashling Partners is all about is really kind of helping organizations plan for their automation future. So education is at the core of our DNA of what we do in client engagements and in programs. We also follow the full development lifecycle, all the way from technical design through migration into a production environment. And really what we're here to talk about today is sustainability. How do we actually sustain and grow and iterate enhancements in our automations and our RPA bots? So before we kind of double click into the actual content around sustainability and production support and ROC models and lessons learned kind of from the trenches, we wanted to kind of take a zoom out approach. What you see here on the left is really a traditional trajectory for an intelligent automation journey. A lot of times organizations think about production support post-production, which is not the right approach from our perspective. We should really be defining that on day one with our first pilot, and then really enhancing and standardizing across SLA definitions, across key responsibilities and roles within change release management and overall monitoring and help desk and ticketing routing in our CoE. And as we grow and scale, you have to iterate. And we're really going to kind of follow some of those journey elements in this conversation today. While you're going through this journey, you're also kind of starting to encounter other technologies, which makes this space fascinating and really interesting to be a part of. Some of those technologies you see here on the right. So RPA is typically what kind of gets the wheel moving from a stationary state. You typically have use cases that have some form of OCR, standing for optical character recognition, or what we also refer to as intelligent data capture, where you're combining RPA with OCR in order to achieve a certain outcome. BPM is another technology you see weaved into the overall automation programs, and thus you have a need to figure out how you're going to support a BPM platform or BPM elements. So examples of some BPM platforms are UiPath Action Center, K2, Appian, IBM. So these are also kind of a part of this broader orchestrated intelligent automation. that we need to think about from a support perspective. And then we kind of get into some of the fun stuff with machine learning and targeted AI and process mining, which we're also seeing included in regards to production support via a ROC model. And once again, what we're here to talk about today is really how do we scale this responsibly with governance in mind, but also with speed in mind to make this sustainable, but make this evolutionary. And as you can see, the concept is to get that flywheel moving faster. So folks that have joined previous education sessions know that this hyper-automation journey is really something that we are very passionate about at Ashling in regards to educating organizations and individuals around. We've done some previous sessions over the last few weeks, kind of in this new virtual world order of learning around plan and build. What we're here to talk about really today is the manage and run piece. So I'm going to kind of do a flyover of both manage and run and sustain, and then we're going to segue into the specifics on what we think a ROC should be, definition, level setting, kind of barriers that we have seen from a challenge perspective, and then also kind of some of the value you can gain in a ROC. Zach's going to walk us through that next section here. Before we do that, when we talk about kind of this intelligent automation journey, the scenario is typically we can build pretty fast, we migrate into production, and it's a different type of migration, right? We're managing bots. Bots seem to be failing, and organizations that are used to kind of this monolithic enterprise application approach become concerned because issues are not supposed to arise after we go live. So managing your digital workers, your digital workforce is becoming more and more imperative. So if you look at some of the steps, thinking through scheduling, thinking how we're going to manage different bots, who's going to manage those bots, just like managers manage certain business units, somebody needs to be responsible for those digital workers. How we're going to add activities and responsibilities to some of these bots' plates via enhancements, via process changes. When we look at manage, there's a couple pieces that come to mind. You have to know the infrastructure and architecture. There's no way around that. You have to be able to test, kind of in a continuous improvement mindset, some of these enhancements, some of these new ideas before you migrate. And you have to be able to report on what's actually happening so that you can make decisions based on insights, not on instinct. Some of the participants typically tend to be a CoE to start, and Zach's going to speak a little bit about that. But more importantly, as a program evolves and starts to have a certain volume and scale to it, there will be a separate entity called the ROC, and that's really what we're drilling in on today. And we talked about some of the technologies. So RPA, OCR, BPM, process mining is becoming more and more prevalent. The fact that we have this great centralized data set to do things with now, we can start to feed some of this higher quality data to pre-built models to do more predictive analysis on potential failures, preventative maintenance, process improvements. So there's kind of a limitless ceiling in regards to what we can do with some of this process data as a program scales. And then obviously organizations have other analytics and BI packages, Power BI, Tableau, Kibana, Elasticsearch. There's a lot of other packages out there that you can leverage if you have those internal skill sets to take advantage of some of these logs and some of these data sets that we're talking about here. So when we jump forward to run and sustain, this is really where we're operationalizing. So really kind of the steps here is where we're proactively planning, sometimes via an operations committee or a CAB, a change application release board. We're planning for frequency of some of these runs, proactive communication on any dependent application changes we're making, reports on failures, key failures that we are encountering, whether they're anomalies or they're continuous, and we're going to make some of those adjustments. So having some type of form of a ticketing system, whether it's ServiceNow, Ashling has our own optimized ticketing system for knowledge articles and KBAs that we like to leverage in order to ensure that we're getting smarter as we move along. Having some of these operational dashboards that Zach will talk about, understanding communications. So here's an example from UiPath where Orchestrator, really their control room, has some communications that you can take advantage of. And there's some kind of nuanced ways to do that. And then just understanding criticality of business processes. So making sure you have those documented during your process design. Same participants and really the same technology at this stage from our perspective is involved with run and monitor. So with that being said, I'm going to transition over to Zach Coles. We really just wanted to give you some context and background on kind of where this fits. And I guess one of my parting comments is that we think this is the most underemphasized and one of the most critical pieces to scalability of an intelligent automation program. And I think in years to come, you're gonna see this kind of be the incubator for continuous process improvement and innovation, not just traditional monitoring and production support and maintenance. So with that being said, I'm going to segue over to Zach Coles, and I'll let you get into the real important content here.
Thanks, Marshall. As Marshall mentioned, my name is Zach Coles. I'm the Technical Services Director here at Ashling Partners. And one of my core responsibilities for the firm here is to make sure that we have that sustain, that run and manage component of what has turned out from what started with the CoE. It has evolved into what we call the ROC, the Robotics Operating Center. And that really allows us, as Marshall has mentioned, to get a good handle around how we support, manage, and continue to grow and scale the automation program within organizations. My background, just real quick, come with about 10 years of IT experience, started out in business intelligence and development, worked my way through that arena into a little bit of analytics, and then did a switch over into infrastructure support and management, which has really given me a very well-rounded background into what we do today at Ashling Partners, where we help them get the automation platform up and running from the infrastructure configuration perspective. We help them build automations, we help them scale, we help them be successful and continue to grow. So with the background that I have across the different various pillars of IT, has really helped strengthen the foundation for the ROC and a lot of the content we'll talk about here today. So CoE and ROC overview, just kind of give everybody an insight as to what the differences are, what we view the differences are in where one team handles another situation versus the other. So just a quick kind of glance, I started out with the organization, we really just focused on the CoE piece to the left here. And over time, we started to see a big need for what you see on the right-hand side. In the beginning, it was a lot of all the same group, but there was a lot of discussion around, well, we need people dedicated to this operation of making sure that we have the platform managed. We have people to help address incidents with the code, and making sure application release management is handled, making sure code promotion is handled appropriately. And that naturally evolved into this whole discussion we're going to talk about today of what we call the ROC. So the CoE being, kind of the governance committee around the strategy, identifying those processes that will be automated, making sure that we have communication, there's training and there's education happening all around the automation program. But the ROC, the Robotics Operating Center here, is really the execution arm, the people that will be keeping a close eye on the automation platform. And we've had great experiences with a lot of client bases, making sure that we have this in place. We continue to evolve and grow and make sure that we take the clients along that journey with us to make sure that they're comfortable with the approach we're taking. We make sure it fits in line with their internal governance, their internal IT protocols and practices. When we start talking about things around security and access, making sure we have change release, code promotion steps, toll gates are in play, all that fun stuff. And we make sure that this Robotics Operating Center is very much attached to the hip with the Center of Excellence. Communication is a big part of this, making sure that the CoE and the ROC are always talking, and we'll get into that here in a couple of minutes. So hypercare versus production support. This is a big topic that we usually have as far as education goes, discussing this with our clients, making sure they understand what the differences are. Hypercare really for us means that 2-week calibration period in production. So once we are ready to move an automation into that production space, we allocate usually about 2 weeks for that calibration period in production. There's various reasons why we do that, some of which is that there are bug fixes unique to the production environment. We're going to see things that we didn't run into in UAT. We didn't run into in development. We do the best we can to test for every scenario. We build in the exception handling per the design document that we build out during the discovery phase. But we understand that we can't always have a like-for-like comparison. We see it time and time again across a lot of different industries, a lot of different client bases where we see, we'll put this into production and Well, you know, there's a pop-up in production that we didn't have to account for in the lower environments and was left out of the design document. We couldn't really test and account for. So a lot of those things start to come up in Hypercare. And this Hypercare period, it's very critical to understand that we'll be fine-tuning a lot of different things inside of this environment, including schedules and environment settings. We do have infrastructure-related details that need to be straightened out. If Google Chrome needs specific settings configured, if Outlook needs specific settings figured, if various applications specific to the client base need to be configured appropriately. We see that a lot come up in this 2-week period where we really start to fine-tune that production-ready code. And just because we're in this Hypercare doesn't mean that code's not production ready. It means there's environmental things around it that sometimes run into issues where we have to make adjustments. So what we like to do is set expectations that small issues will occur. So we need to let the business stakeholders that, hey, we're in production, we're in this Hypercare phase, we're going to hit a few bumps down the road. It's almost inevitable. There's very few scenarios that we, Ashling Partners, have ran into where we put a code into production day one of Hypercare and it runs smooth without any kind of tweaking, adjustments, anything like that. If you talk to anybody in our organization that is participating in these Hypercare phases, they'd very much agree with me that it's a very rare occurrence. So what we'd like to do is set expectations that small issues will occur with those key stakeholders. So the individuals that will be looking for the results of this automation, to make sure that they understand that, you will see results. We may have to discuss some of those results. We may have to make some fine-tuned adjustments. And then when we get into production support, this is the run phase with a mature production automation. So we've gone through this 2-week calibration period. We have gone through the bug fixes unique to the production environment, and we've really gone through the whole most of what we think will be the known bugs that we have to address, right? So we're hoping that this is more mature. We don't have as many of those small bumps and cosmetic things that we'll have to tweak within the environment. So we're ready to go to a more run and sustain mode in the production support space. So these schedules will be solidified. Processes are running full cycles without interruption. That's the plan. That's the goal as we get through this 2-week period, is that they're running without interruption because, they couldn't get to a specific URL or the web page isn't loading, things like that. We can flush those out during the Hypercare phase if there become issues down the line. So for production support, what this means for us from a ROC perspective, just going into that next phase where we get past the Hypercare state, we're in this production support phase, we really see 5 key pillars here at Ashling Partners. And the first one is really infrastructure management. So when we talk about that, we like to talk around the underlying components that the automation software sits on. So you're talking about your virtual machines, your virtual servers, database components, and things of that nature. So what we try to do from a ROC perspective is do that basic troubleshooting, understanding that we, at least at Ashling Partners, if we're helping run or facilitate that ROC operational team, that we may not have the ability to address everything down to the nth degree of your infrastructure. And that's when we bring in the IT on the client side to say, this is what we see, this is what we're noticing, can we go look at this with their assistance? Because we don't always have the keys to the car. So sometimes we have to bring in those teams and subject matter experts within the client base as well. So we will escalate those as we need to. We'll coordinate the recommended maintenance and things of that nature. And we'll also deal with the vendors related to the automation software, such as UiPath or any of the other ones that may be a part of your automation platform. The next pillar is the service desk management, and that was what Marshall addressed earlier, where we at Ashling Partners have the ticketing system that we use for RPA technical support. It really is a quick, easy form for clients to contact us, escalate issues. We have severity levels attached to that, where we talk about getting them a response and digging into the issue as soon as possible, depending on how severe it is for the client. We have those operating procedures. They know who to contact, and they know who to escalate to in the case of that this isn't an urgent, immediate issue. So we bring the service desk management element into the ROC itself to help facilitate and manage expectations of the clients. The next important pillar that we have here is application release management. And really this is talking about the applications that are included with these automations around the client side. So when we're talking about your ERP system, we're talking about your HR systems, we're talking about the applications that the robots log into to perform functions for your organization. So we start tracking those. We start making sure that if those are receiving major updates, that we make sure we do any kind of regression testing if needed. If we're doing a major facelift to your ERP system where we know a lot of the UI, the layouts, or the APIs are changing, let's go ahead and get that in play for the lower environments. We can go do that regression testing before we have any impact to production. We also will take the lead on responsibility for the automation software break fixes and patches, should those come out. If there's issues that, we need to patch right away from the vendor themselves and say, hey, this is urgent, go ahead and put this in play. We'll make sure we coordinate that and schedule that appropriately with the clients here that we have. And then we also help with version upgrades. So some of the things that we do as part of the ROC is we will help coordinate and educate when that should happen, what we need to do to get there, and how we kind of go through that upgrade plan. The next key pillar here is monitoring and performance reporting. One of the biggest things that we see becoming more and more critical is monitoring and the analytics around that. So making sure that our bots are running. How are they running? Are they getting the throughput that we thought they'd get? Are they getting more? Are they getting less? Is we getting our return on this investment? So we help them build that with some of the standard tools that UiPath partners with, Kibana, Elasticsearch and Kibana. We also work with the various other reporting dashboard tools. Depending on the organization, there are various tools that work very well with the analytics and reporting aspects, and we'll talk about those here in a little bit. But we do help out from a ROC perspective with the development of those reports, using existing tools if you have them, or overall just building out the framework that you need to make sure that we have eyes on the monitoring and the KPIs for the organization. And then last but not least, operations management. We help schedule those automations. We monitor those automations. We talk about optimization opportunities. Where can we see efficiency gains? Are there tweaks that we can make to these automations in which that we can go back to the development team, have them look at this, put in a new version, and we get a better ROI on our automation. We also talk about capacity planning, making sure that we have enough robots, making sure we have enough virtual machines out there to support the automations that are coming from the CoE and putting into production that the ROC is now supporting. So with that, we like to talk about the common challenges we see with the ROC. With the evolution from CoE evolving into this ROC space, we've noticed that there are a few different ways that production support in the automation space is a little different. First and foremost, the traditional support models don't work with automation. There will be issues after go live, and Marshall mentioned this earlier. We try to over communicate this when we start talking about go lives, especially during that hypercare phase, as I addressed. There's going to be issues. We're going to see small things we didn't run into. Bots are going to fail. We're going to see error messages the first couple of weeks of running this. Now, the goal is to not hopefully run all the way up through those 2 weeks of issues, and we get those addressed as soon as possible, and we work really rapidly to get that done. But there will be issues. We like to communicate and over communicate those expectations. So in traditional support models, you put it in production, you expect there's no issues, we move on. If there is an incident, we raise it, but they're few and far between. With the automation space, we see more of these small tweaks, small instances, small nuances that we simply just didn't account for during the UAT and dev testing because simply they don't exist, or there's production unique characteristics that we had to account for. The next one here plays off of the first one. The automation steps don't change, but the applications in the environment do. So you have to understand that the target systems that the automations try to reach out to can be down. They can be unavailable. If it's a SaaS solution that the client is using that's hosted by a third party, we have some unique challenges there where not everything is within the control of the ROC. It's not always control of the client either. So infrastructure may be down and unavailable or offline. VMs go down. They get hung up. They get locked up. RDP doesn't work. You can't get into it. You have to forcibly reboot it. We see that time and time again. And then also key service accounts, for example, get locked out. So if a robot service account gets locked out, guess what? The robot's not going to be able to execute the automation. If we're trying to log into an ERP system and the account we're authenticating with has been expired or locked out, guess what? The bot's going to stop and we're going to see issues. So we see a lot of this happen in the production space, and these are a lot of the things that do and can go wrong. But keep in mind that the automation is still doing the same steps you put out there from day one in production, right? So the variables that change are the applications and the environment around that automation and the steps. The next one here is, the resolution of those incidents that we've been talking about. They take multiple resources and experts to kind of come together, make that solution possible and implement it, depending on the nature. Going back to my SaaS solution example, if that is a reality, we have to go reach out to that vendor, bring them into the conversation and say, why can't we get to the ERP system that's hosted in your cloud data center? Why can't we talk to the IT infrastructure folks to understand why these VMs keep going down every day at 9 a.m.? What is getting in the way? So we have to bring multiple subject matter experts, multiple individuals, multiple resources to the table to make sure that they understand what the incident is and how to resolve it fast and effectively. And then as we get down to that, the collaborative approach, we overemphasize that between the ROC, the CoE, and the key stakeholders, and to make sure that not only your automation program is supported, but it's continuing to improve and grow, right? So that's really one of the core functions of the ROC is, hey, we're not only supporting this, we're helping you continue to scale, improve, and grow from a production level support. So roles and responsibilities, kind of looking at that after we talk about the 4 ways that it's different, we want to talk about what those roles and responsibilities look like. So we have 3 broad categories: people, technology, and process. As we go down these individual categories here, we start talking about the people that you have to bring into these. You know who to contact when things go sideways, and clearly identifying those individuals and defining their responsibilities is key, right? So making sure that we have primaries and secondaries, understanding those escalation points, management of the automation platform and all the components around that, making sure that we have the people and the responsibilities identified. So when things happen and they need to be resolved fast, we have that clear line of communication and we know who to go reach out to. From a technology perspective, when we start talking about development standards that will actually save you a ton of overhead in the long run, the more you can have your developers abide by a single set of standards, from the project build team in the CoE to the production support side, it just makes those resources interchangeable as far as capacity goes from a development perspective, but it allows anybody on the development team to really pick up the automation, look at it, and know where to go for certain particular issues. So we have SDDs that really document what those details are. We have reusable scripts and components that we use at Ashling to make sure that we give our development team that advanced starting line to make sure they're abiding by the standards, but also getting it done fast and effectively. And then we've also talked about the reporting, analytics, making sure we have monitoring, operational reporting is taken care of, making sure we have the KPIs measured, knowing what's going on, when it's happening, and how we are getting that return on our investment. And then last, but certainly not least, is a continuous improvement portion of this. One of our favorite tools here at Ashling Partners from a development perspective is DevOps, Azure DevOps. We use it for CI/CD and enhancements. We use it a lot across our client bases. It really helps us keep it organized from a code management perspective with the feature branches, but also make sure we have toll gates for approvals and that we continuously abide by those and the rigor around making sure the toll gates are in play, the right people are seeing the code, it's getting approved, and it's ending up in the correct location for those go lives in the different environments. Some of the other tools that we like to leverage, of course, process mining in the management of that platform, using different tools to get our insights from reporting and analytics, making sure that we have those continuous improvement processes in place where we continue to perfect the automations out there based on the business needs. And finally, with the process here, we talk a little bit about the way that we go through our different levels of support. So talking about the level 1 triage, moving down to the support from the CoE and the business stakeholders, and then ultimately, if it gets to the level of severity or need where we start to bring in the ROC experts, the IT experts, we start to make sure that we have those service providers in play and we understand what the issue is and how to address it appropriately. So we have these different levels of triage. We start with the simple, what's happening, and if we can address these early and often during the lower levels of support, great. If not, that's where the ROC and those IT subject matter experts come into play on the level 3. So on this next page, we want to talk about what a support example looks like. This is certainly not chiseled in stone. It's one of the examples that we use to kind of generate the discussion with our clients to what it may look like. And we usually try to fit this into what our vision is from Ashling Partners into what the client's expectations are. So we talk about how the users submit tickets, whether that's web, phone, email, the first level being that service desk triage where we help provide KBA so that that team understand where to route information in incidents as they come up. And then either that goes out to the CoE, the business process owners, things of that nature, depending on the severity of the issue and what they need to address. And then there's escalation points, as I mentioned on the previous slide, for the third level where we talk about the IT experts at the client side. We talk about the ROC support team that here at Ashling Partners, we help clients build and run, sustain, and then eventually if we need to reach out to those vendors for the RPA platforms, the OCR platforms, we have the ability to do that as an escalation point. Next, we want to kind of talk about what those operational dashboards and reports and analytics and insights look like. So for analytics and insights, we talk about a few key things. We want to make sure we're using the available data to measure core KPIs that define success. And what that really means is we get a bunch of data off these automation platforms, whether it's the RPA platform, it's the OCR platform, it's a BPM platform. There's action happening at every step of the way. And there's logs being generated, there's statistics being captured, and we want to make sure we're using that information to provide that proof that we are doing what we set out to do from an automation perspective. And we're not only meeting it, but we're possibly even exceeding goals defined by those key stakeholders. So making sure that we educate not only the CoE, the ROC, and the automation team, but also those key stakeholders that wanted this automation in the first place, right? So analyzing the data through enterprise tools will help us do that. It'll also point out efficiency gains, opportunities for that, and then additional functionality that can be added to increase that ROI. And then finally, we want the creation of operational reports and dashboards that can give you that executive level reporting. So we get that phrase a lot here at Ashling Partners, especially around the ROC, is executive level reporting and what that means. What that means to us is a single pane of glass where someone can come look at it and know exactly where their automations are, how they're running, what the statistics, the throughput, and what our success and failure rates are around those automations. So one of the examples that we've generated in the past, and we continue to improve, we continue to build out new creative ways to approach this, is we look at something similar to a jobs dashboard example. And this is just with some fictitious data that we have put across when we start talking about examples of what we can provide for some of these ROC operational dashboards. We talk about the jobs that they run, the run times, which machines are running them, and then the details around that. So we start to get a visual representation where individuals can come here and look at this dashboard without having to log into the UI of Orchestrator or of an OCR tool, of a BPM tool, to make sure that they have access into these production environment automation spaces. But what they can do is get the same look and feel and the same statistical guidance by looking at these external dashboards where there's not as much rigor and control around their access. Another common one that we put together is around errors. Everybody wants to know, like, well, if jobs are running, how's our success looking? So we can break that down into errors per robot machine, errors per process, looking at the different timestamps of when we ran into issues and what those reasons were. So this kind of gives more of an operational dashboard, maybe for the internal ROC team to say, all right, we're seeing errors, we're seeing these patterns, and we're seeing this machine is really struggling with this automation, but this one's not. We can start identifying those trends and putting calls to action around some of the data that we're seeing. And then finally, KPIs and value dashboards. So this really comes down to when we talk about that executive level dashboard. What are we looking at for the business ROI? How are we looking at money saved, time saved, things like that? This breaks it down into examples that we can generate for the show and tell. And then when we get in there, we really put the actionable data once we start to generate that information around your automation platform to help generate these statistics so that you have the ability to I would show the value of your automation to those key stakeholders and really drive that conversation. And what we see time and time again is when we can prove that out to the business, that generates more interest and more excitement around the automation. And that's how we start to see the scale and the growth really take off, is when we can show them that, hey, we are saving time, we are saving money, we are saving resources across the company with these automations. And that generates excitement and enthusiasm around the automation platform and really gets that buy-in from the individuals that control what will and will not be automated. And then some other honorable mentions from other technologies. UiPath Insights. UiPath has done a good job of trying to incorporate this in their enterprise platform. You'll start to see that technology evolve and really mature over the span of 2020 here. Power BI and Tableau, we have had successes with clients that have implemented that as well from an overall enterprise analytics and business intelligence platform. They find there's unique ways you can take the log messages generated from these applications and automations and compile them into a data warehouse model and layer in your Tableau and Power BI. So you're able to hook in not only the automation aspects and KPIs, but also ancillary data that can help the business understand and get a really true holistic picture of how their performance is. So with that being said, we're going to talk a little bit more now with the value of the ROC. And one of the key values of the ROC is really working with the CoE. And this slide, I feel, and I think Marshall agrees with me, is very powerful. And what this really highlights is the plan, build, run communication points with the CoE and the ROC. One of the biggest things we have from a planning perspective is assisting with capacity planning. So as the CoE continues to get inundated with automation candidates, we've shown the business that this automation platform is not only successful, it's saving the company money and time, FTE hours, all that fun stuff. So we're starting to get inundated. So we have to start talking about capacity planning. So new candidates come through the line. We need to make sure that we have enough runway for that. Do we have enough robots? How many robots are we going to need for this automation? What does this process look like? So we can provide that as a ROC. We can give them guidance, understanding that, hey, let's go ahead and prioritize these appropriately. We know what we're going to need to do. Let's get these requests into the IT experts to build out the framework for us to be successful and to continue to scale. We also talk about making sure the licensing is in place, the applications are in place, all that fun stuff with capacity planning. So there's a lot that goes into that, and the ability to have this communication with the CoE to understand what's coming down this pipeline is critical to making sure that the ROC is functioning appropriately. From a build perspective, we get insights into those build cycles. So now that they're being approved, we get the build cycles. We know when these releases are coming. We know that these deployments are being approved, but we have to make sure that these enhancements are also getting worked on, not just net new builds. So we also get to ensure that we have visibility into those build cycles, and we know what's coming and how it's being approved and what's being prioritized. And then in the run phase, communication of the issues, right? So making sure those clear lines of escalation are there for fast incident resolution, right? So from this run phase, communication, communication, communication. When we start to talk about scaling programs, we start to bring in more individuals, and we start to make sure that we have everybody has a seat at the table to understand how communication is going to work, making sure that everybody understands who to contact, how to contact them, what needs to be done, and by who, so that we have operational improvements that get identified and implemented as they come about, and that they're there to make sure the CoE communicates to the ROC to making sure that those actually get executed appropriately. So again, one of the best values that we have here is making sure you are married to the hip with the CoE from a ROC perspective. Another value of the ROC is governance and structure. This comes up a lot as well, making sure that we have the governance and structure in place based on not only what we, Ashling Partners, see as industry standard, but also making sure we fit the mold of the client environment as well, based on their governance, their structure, what they expect to see. So defining that around incident management is big, making sure we determine how to handle break fixes, making sure that we follow the proper code promotion steps for in-depth issues, making sure we understand that, if we can address this with a quick, easy exception to handle this pop-up, great, let's go ahead and do that, make sure we test it out. If this is going to be a long, in-depth investigation, we need to send this back to the development team. They need to go take a look at it. They need to go do some UAT, making sure we sign off on this and making sure that this is approved appropriately through that structure of approval. Creating maintenance schedules for infrastructure in business applications. So one of the things that we often see is, when do we do patching? When do we do these software upgrades? These questions come up a lot because they're like, well, if these robots run 24/7, when do we put a break in the action? So making sure we have those conversations early and often when we start to build out your production and before we start to scale too fast and too wide, we want to make sure that we have these in play. Making sure that there is adequate downtime to get these patches in place, making sure the IT experts can go in there, take those Windows updates, apply those application updates, and making sure that there's no issues, critical security issues that would potentially cause harm down the line. Continuous improvement is something we also drive here, defining those workflows, prioritization formed by the CoE. So the communication, again, making sure we have that continuous improvement structure in place, and making sure we work towards a not only sustainable, but a continue to grow and more sophisticated environment. So, and then last but not least, we see this every now and again with a lot of the larger organizations we've worked with here at Ashling Partners, but a participation in the Change Advisory Board, or CAB, as needed. So what happens is there's changes that happen in the organization that may impact automation, maybe not the automation platform directly, but some of the applications that we are interacting with on a routine basis. So what we would like to do is participate in those from the ROC perspective to give them guidance on, hey, if you're going to make that change, that's going to impact us over here, and we need to be aware about it, and we need to be able to plan for it. So giving that kind of voiceover inside of the CAB sessions as needed has shown value internally at a lot of organizations to make sure that the RPA, OCR, BPM technologies have a voice in that discussion. And we've talked about it already a few times here, but we'll continue to harp on it, but continuous improvement framework, right? So we want to make sure that we're always evaluating, we're always identifying, we're always leveraging new technologies. We're making sure that we're not satisfied with our current state, but we're always looking for new opportunities to make automations that are in production better. We're leveraging new technologies to enhance the overall platform for automation. We leverage things like Azure DevOps and Jenkins to streamline approvals, for example. We implement enhancements and optimizations that have been approved through the proper channels of the CoE and the business stakeholders. And then, we manage those code promotions or rollouts of new versions of automations, right, to make sure that's a seamless transition from UAT and business approval to production without any kind of interruptions, roadblocks, things of that nature. And then we talk about leveraging the future technologies. So something we wanted to kind of double click into here. We understand more than most probably that the automation space is growing, and it's growing fast. There's new technologies and feature enhancements that are coming out all the time. As we work across multiple tool sets for intelligent automation, we start to find out the analytics are improving over here. We have process mining tools that are coming out. Machine learning and AI are very much on the forefront of this automation space and are driving a lot of the unique conversations around what is coming next and how it will be implemented and how can we weave this into the fabric of our already existing automation platform. And the ROC will help with that. And what the ROC likes to do is come through with how we can layer this into what we have today, making sure this is a seamless transition, and how we can enable the automation team, the CoE, the development team with these new tools, and making sure that they're leveraged appropriately, effectively, and they really drive that ROI for the new, for the business key stakeholders and things like that. So we'll help facilitate those upgrades to those features, integrate those technologies. There's this list here that you have in front of you with analytics, process mining, machine learning, AI. There's a ton coming out, as Marshall mentioned earlier. You've seen this graphic before, but we continue to see more and more innovation across various vendors in the different key areas of intelligent automation. The last but not least, I think this is a really big point for a lot of the automation leads that you see in organizations, not only for us at Ashling Partners, but also from the client side. This top line here, confidence and peace of mind. At the end of the day, the businesses just want to make sure that someone is keeping an eye on this automation platform, that we're just not sitting it and forgetting it. So they want to know that someone's out there keeping an eye on it, making sure that the controls and the approvals are being enforced, that we know these workflows are functioning appropriately. If there are issues, we're addressing them. And that we're always, again, continuously improving on our automation platform and processes. So as we continue to go through this ROC operation that we have here with our clients, that we continue to improve here at Ashling Partners, we always want to make sure that this confidence and peace of mind is something we can deliver on, making sure that the organizations that enlist our help to make this ROC a reality have that comfort level, knowing that their automation platform is taken care of. So with that, Marshall, I think that's the end of the content I wanted to cover around the ROC. I would like to, if you're okay with it now, opening it up for questions, comments from our audience and participants to see if there's anything that they'd like to kind of dive into a little deeper.
Sure. No, wonderful content, Zach, and certainly a lot to consider. There's several questions that came through here, so I'm just going to cycle through some of these. The first is around how is production support different in the RPA/intelligent automation world from other enterprise application support structures? So I know you covered on some of that, but probably that question is asked in a slightly different way than probably what you covered.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good one. So yeah, it kind of goes back to what is automation? What are we doing with that? And the reason why it's so different than your typical enterprise application that you put in and you're just supporting is you're really touching multiple applications per automation. You're trying to make sure that one digital worker is successful while interacting with various applications. And really what that turns into is a more complex support model, because you're going to need subject matter experts from various corners of the business, not only from an automation perspective, but also if you're running into unique challenges within applications that you're interacting with. So it really expands the scope from to having a very siloed support model for one enterprise application to now you're involving multiple enterprise applications potentially. On top of that, an automation platform that is interacting with it. So it starts that scope creep starts to kind of trickle out with the individuals you have to bring. So what that does is it makes sure that communication is there. You have to enforce that in making sure that everybody understands what this automation platform is, how it's interacting with the business applications. So it turns it into a much broader, much more involved, much more detailed support model than what you typically see today with a lot of enterprise applications.
Nice. So a second question came in. I think you kind of hit it with the future technologies slide, but there's probably the ability to expand on it. So it's around how a ROC can be a source of innovation, not just a group conducting break fixes.
Yeah. So again, yeah, that's like you said, it kind of goes back to the future technologies. Yeah, break fixes are certainly one of the core responsibilities of the ROC, and I don't want to make that kind of a small point. It's very much a big point. It's very much a core focus, but we don't want to stop there. From a ROC perspective, we want to make sure that, again, continuous improvement is there, and part of that continuous improvement is not only dealing with the tools that we have today, but layering the new ones that come out to continue to enhance that automation platform's capabilities. So looking at things like machine learning and AI, where you have those pre-built models that we talked about earlier, Marshall, with having data to feed those models and make more educated and fast decisions from an automation perspective will really be key in making sure that, you know, we're weaving those into the fabric of the automation platform at every program we work with.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Zach, and maybe I can expand on that further a little bit. Just one thought I have is talent, right? I think ROC, kind of in its modern form, is an exciting place to be, but production support traditionally tends to be a little harder to attract talent to. So when you kind of extrapolate that future technology set on top of kind of this modern approach to production support, I think you can actually attract the talent you need to really kind of survive and thrive, if you will. And so I think that's directly correlated to being a source of innovation from a ROC perspective. So sorry, we've got a couple more questions here, Zach. So I'm just going to keep cycling through. So when does the CoE need a ROC? Simply put.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So when do you start forming the ROC, or when do you build the ROC, I guess would be a better way of saying that, right? So you should be thinking about it day one. As soon as you have a CoE established, that should be one of the first agenda items, in my opinion, that you should start to consider. Even well before you get anything in production. If you're spinning up a ROC around after you have 4 or 5 processes in production, in my opinion, it's not the worst thing in the world, but it's late, in my opinion. So you want to have that structure in place before you try to get those automations put into production. You want the ROC established, so when your first automation gets there, you know who's handling it, you know how it's going to be handled, you know how incidents are going to be routed, you know who's addressing and who's monitoring that automation and future automations within the whole program. So the right time is right away. When you're looking at forming your ROC, you should have that CoE established, and the ROC should be the next thing that you address within that CoE, amongst other things, right? I mean, there's various things that the CoE helps with and establishes as part of that core capabilities of the CoE, but making sure that the ROC is something to consider right after that before you start pushing things into production is ideally the right time. Sure.
So next question, Zach, is around the dashboards section that you went through, some of the screenshots. So is it possible to integrate third-party data into some of these pre-built dashboards? So I think this question is referring to maybe not just the operational dashboards, but the business value dashboards, I think is probably what this is related to.
Yeah, it certainly can be. There's various ways to handle that kind of on the back end, and not to dive too far into the details of what that could or could not look like. But it is possible. A lot of these third-party tools, Tableau, Power BI, even Kibana, you can pull and layer in data sets from outside of just your automation platform. So what we've seen across some of our clients and some of the ROC operational dashboards is you start out with that from an automation perspective, and you start to weave in some other metrics from within the organization to give you, again, more kind of that more holistical view of what this is impacting, not only directly in the automation platform, but impacting outside of that. So yes, it is possible. We see a lot of clients go through kind of a data warehousing, BI, business intelligence rigor with ETLs, and trying to bring in and massaging that data into one location or a few various locations, depending on how that's carved out in the back end, and layering some of those enterprise applications, Power BI, Tableau, to really bring it all together.
That's great. Okay, well, let's maybe take one more, and then we'll give everybody 10 minutes back in their day. So there's one on DevOps, and how do you leverage a DevOps operating model and supporting technologies to enhance a ROC operation?
Yeah, DevOps. So Azure DevOps, and we'll use that as kind of our example. I mean, Jenkins does similar things where you're able to do a lot of the pipelines that you can in Azure DevOps. But Azure DevOps can really enhance a few things. It can streamline those approval processes and toll gates. A lot of times, there's a lot of manual methods that we see out there today where it does, the development team gets done with it. They want someone to approve it, all that fun stuff. And there's emails traded back and forth and approvals and meetings talked about it. In DevOps, what you're able to do with the CI/CD pipelines, not only are you able to use a Git repository to manage and store that code with feature enhancements and different branching methodologies that you can instill there, but from the pipeline perspective, you can really control who approves, how they approve it, and when they approve it. And really that's the best way to kind of put in toll gates from a programmatic perspective. They can go ahead and allow those things to go through as the business approves it. It helps build rigor and consistency, making sure that there's auditable trails. We know who's approved and when. There's all that documented within the CI/CD DevOps space. And it really helps make sure that we are building consistently, we are deploying consistently, the right people are approving at the right time, and that the code will then make it out to its final destinations from a pipeline perspective. So we're seeing DevOps start to become more and more of a critical piece from a development, software development lifecycle perspective, where we're seeing UiPaths fit into that space a little bit better. The integration with Studio, for example, just to kind of give you an RPA perspective on that, we see the integration there where they're able to talk about it. So we use that Azure DevOps tool to help package the code and to deliver it to the orchestrator component. And we're continuing to see that space grow with other tools as well. So it's a growing space with DevOps today. And again, consistency, putting in the toll gates, making sure that we have the proper people approving, and again, visibility into who's doing what and when.
Great. Thanks, Zach. Appreciate it. So maybe to summarize and round out this educational session, everyone. So appreciate everybody's time. I think just to overemphasize the importance of thinking about the ROC, or whatever vernacular you want to give it, on day one. I think that is critical at this point. We certainly think at Ashling Partners that this is going to be a source of continued emphasis in programs as more and more bots are in production, more and more emerging technologies and advancements of current technologies continue. There's going to be more and more of a microscope and scrutiny on how we're supporting these, how we're maintaining these, how we're enhancing these scripts and these bots that we're putting into production. So with that being said, this is kind of an intro. There's going to be future sessions, especially nowadays with everybody working virtual for the foreseeable future. Feel free to subscribe to our newsletter at ashlingpartners.com and follow some of these virtual webinars. Very big proponents of continuing the education, whether it's virtual or in person. And really appreciate everybody's time. And Zach, really appreciate your mind share today.
Yeah, likewise, Marshall. Thanks for having me and giving me the opportunity to speak to the broader audience here today. It's been great.
Great. Have a good day, everybody.